Hey everybody, and happy Patriots Day. Hope you're all surviving our continued kind of remote learning and quarantine. Today we are very fortunate to have Mike Massaro, the CEO of Flywire, and the parent of a couple prep students as well, to join us for Live Sense You Ask. Mike, thanks for making some time for us today.
Dr. Thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
We really appreciate it, Mike. Well, we've been asking a lot of alums who've been kind of doing this so far. Can you remember back to your time at Prep and kind of as you kind of look at what you're doing today, how has St. John's influenced who you are today and how you do the work that you're doing these days?
Yeah, it's I can remember back. In some ways, I still feel like mentally I probably roughly around the age of 18. So it seems in some ways. Frankly, my wife, who I dated while I was at St. John's Prep, would probably agree with my statement. So I remember it very vividly. There's a couple of things. I mean, I think probably first is especially in times like this, some bit of uncertainty, right? Like, I think the thing that the Prep has always done, it continues to do, is kind of try and give people perspective of dealing with uncertain times and dealing with changes and just things that get thrown at you in life, and resilience. And I think now more than ever, that's probably one of the things that I leverage the most. Frankly, it's a lot to do with the CEO role in general, right? Your ability to understand, as you're probably well aware, things come at you from all different angles. And so if you're not able to kind of compartmentalize things, if you're not able to deal with different sets of information, make decisions with imperfect information, it gets to be a really tough role, because that's what your constant day-to-day is. I'd say there's probably two other things that, empathy, authenticity is another one. It's actually a value at Flywire, being authentic. And I feel like that's a critical one, right? When you're leading groups of people, what is your leadership style? Is it that of a servant leader? Is it that of someone who, thinks about others as they lead? There's just so many opportunities for you to kind of get lost in the role, or get lost in kind of the public facing view of it. And one of the things that's been very important to our culture has been kind of authentic and focus on the employee or the flymate. And so those are just a few things off the top of my head that I think, you could easily go back to St. John's Prep and kind of line up in kind of my CEO role.
That's awesome. It's great to hear you talk about the importance of servant leadership, given that that's something we talk about with our students all the time. And just so all of our students know, I didn't prompt you on that or tell you to say that came out naturally from you. Can you share a little bit about kind of just a brief description of what Flywire is and how you got involved with Flywire, and kind of what your day-to-day life is like as CEO of a startup?
Yeah, sure. So, I actually had graduated the Prep and had intended to go more into the medical, right? So I actually went to Villanova for a while, transferred into business at Babson. And so even while at Babson, I focused more on graduating and getting a big corporate job. So I actually was all set to go work for Price Waterhouse, and I got pulled into the startup life. So went to visit a buddy at a startup who graduated a year ahead of me, and of that company offered me a job. And so I kind of got pulled into the startup world early in my career, and thankfully, that was probably the best thing. That lunch that my friend never ended up attending because the product was broken, that was probably the best thing to happen to me. And so I've been part of 3 startups. This Flywire is the first one I've run, but the other 2 companies were both pretty successful, and then ended up getting acquired in their evolution. And how I came to know Flywire was through some of the contacts from the first startups. So again, a number of people that I had worked with before had been there. I was kind of part of this kind of founding group of people that came to know of the idea. We had an international student who was from Spain going to MIT and had trouble paying for his MBA. And so I had more of a billing and a payments background, as did a number of the other folks early on. And we love that story. We love the fact that it shouldn't be that hard. And we kind of believed that payments were going to become more and more global, right? And so we started off the business helping international students pay for their tuition at places like MIT and Harvard and elsewhere. And then we built the company over the years, expanding that value proposition, but also adding other software to different verticals. So today we do education, healthcare, and travel payments.
Oh,
And what they have consistent is that they're traditionally global, they're traditionally large and complex. And that kind of puts the anxiety of the consumer at a high level. And then the people on the receiving side of those payments, the people at the university finance departments or the medical hospitals or the travel companies, they're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to pay them, but they don't have a lot of resources. So we try and help the consumer, but also at the same time help our client, who's the one trying to receive money. So that's the company that we built. It's been almost a 10-year run, I guess 9-year run, and so now it's 550 people, 12 offices globally, and we've raised over $200 million now in venture funding. So
wow.
pretty crazy.
And would you say you guys are still a startup, or how, I mean, in your world, you've got a lot of different connections. What is a startup no longer a startup?
Yeah, probably about a year ago, I think is when I started talking to kind of the all companies and the Flymates and saying, hey, we aren't that. We're still a high growth, financial technology, fintech company. But at our size and our scale, also at our financial kind of footprint, probably well past the traditional startup label. So we've been trying to focus on high growth, is kind of the term, and also just trying to make sure people understand that there was a time in which, you truly operate as a startup, and now as you kind of grow up and become bigger and have a shot at being kind of a global, highly visible, high scale company, large scale company, you just have to, you behave differently. You have to put different things into practice in the business. And so part of that was about just making sure people realize that, right? Like there's early stage stuff and kind of later stage stuff. And sometimes people want to have different careers and they like doing the early stage thing and they don't like doing later stage. And so even within tech, there's all different types of kind of companies and things to be part of. And so we showed that line about last year where we said, hey, we're going to be doing more scaling. We're going to be doing more process. We're going to be getting bigger. We can't stay small, which is a good thing, but it's different. And so we tried to make that clear to our Flymates.
So my sources, Mike, gave me a whole bunch of things that I was supposed to read over the weekend, and I looked at most of them trying to, figure things out. But you had a quote when you were recognized as the EY 2019 Entrepreneur of the Year, which is a great honor and congratulations. You said, either you have a business in which you are the best in what you do, or you pivot to something else. Can you chat a little bit about, I think about our students right now. I think about some of the things that they're facing of, it's really hard to kind of go to school remotely, and our student athletes have lost a lot, our seniors have lost a lot, and it's just a challenge. When you're focusing on really making that business the best at what you do, how do you deal with those times when it's challenging, when it takes more grit and there's less reward coming in, and how do you kind of keep yourself motivated and inspire your team?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we try and do. It's hard, especially, we're dealing with a global team. So and we've had some Flymates, we've been kind of a month into this here in the United States. We've Flymates who've been work from home for 4 months in Asia, nearly 75 people, right? And so that work for Flywire. So, we try to keep a bit of perspective, right? Of, what we're going through, is some have gone through that for months on end already. We also try and celebrate, different wins. Prior to kind of COVID, we would celebrate all types of things, right, related to growing our business. Now we're celebrating all types of kind of people overcoming adversity, people doing things for clients to go above and beyond, just things that may not have been the things you used to celebrate. And I think that's important, right? I think also making sure it may be kind of physical distancing, but I'm not sure it's social distancing, right? Like, how do you leverage tech as best as you can to still get with people, right? To see people's faces, to stay engaged. I think that is very important. And I think there is new challenges, and I think that in some ways, whatever that challenge is somewhat exciting and new. And I think you've got to find a bit of hope, right? And whether that's recognizing people, whether that's I saw some of the stuff that SJP did on the teams passing the balls back and forth on social media, right? It's like those types of things do actually matter, right? They keep people engaged. They kind of build that camaraderie and that teamwork in times of adversity. So those are some of the things that we've done at Flywire.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, it's such a new world. I mean, as you said, there's a lot of people in the world that have been doing this for a lot longer. So we've got to kind of learn from them. A lot of what we've talked about with our staff and with our students is kind of developing a sense of appreciating diversity and coming to understand different cultures. Your company is engaging with people from a wide range of different nationalities and areas. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge and the opportunity of kind of engaging and coming to understand different cultures?
Yeah, it's, so our business, we have 12 offices globally. We have 32 different nationalities inside the company. To me, that's, it's a pretty diverse group of Flymates. And, likewise, we touch a customer base that's massively diverse. So every year we process payments from 200 countries and territories. And so when you think of that, you have to have an appreciation for different cultures. You also have to, I think really have that as part of, what you believe provides value to the customer, right? Like understanding that the uniqueness of the situation. And I think whether it's for our employee base or for our customers, right? I think that's what we try to do to help differentiate a bit. It is an environment in which you have to, as much as you want rules, as much as you want, everything to be kind of the same or easy, everybody's a different situation. I think you have to understand where people are coming from. We're all kind of a combination of the experiences we've had throughout our lives, and some of that's where you grew up, some of that's geography, but a lot of that's family, a lot of that's adversity that you faced. And so I think you have to kind of look at that, whether you're leading people or whether you're trying to service a population of users or consumers and building a product that they may like. I think those types of companies that can do that can kind of stand out.
Sure.
And differentiate themselves both from a hiring people perspective, maintaining talent, but also from, customers see it, right? They see it when they look at procuring products and services, and they look for, I think, a bit of that authenticity, a bit of that, are you engaged with your customer base? And for us, that means diversity, means global.
That's great. Well, a lot of our students are going to be looking for internships, looking for jobs over time. I'm sure you guys at Flywire, as you're looking to hire new Flymates and doing different work criteria as to who you want to hire and what you're looking for in your prospective employees. What advice would you give our students as they're looking to kind of build resumes and approach different companies for internships and positions based on kind of the characteristics that you guys look for in Flymates at Flywire?
A couple of things. I do think, I go back a little bit to my St. John's prep timeline. One thing that I think a lot about is even how I ended up going down a different path from where I am now, like almost going down a majorly different path than where I am now. And when I look back on, junior high, even the time at St. John's, in some ways I was oblivious to things that should have been really obvious, right? Like I love tech, right? Like I was, whether it was, probably playing too many video games for my parents' liking or whatever, but I love tech, I love to work on a computer. I love to upgrade a computer. And when I look back on that, I honestly didn't see the career path in that back at the time. I mean, it was early 90s and most of the youth in tech was on the West Coast. Even though I knew a lot about it because I was kind of a geek about it, I still didn't connect the dots into the career opportunities there. And so the one thing I would say to folks, and I say it to my boys all the time, which is, what do you like doing, right? Like, what do you really enjoy doing? Because if you deviate from what you enjoy doing, and I think that starts, even at that middle school, high school level, you start to understand what you like doing. And it doesn't just mean about like, what do you like learning? It means like, do you like to work in groups, right? Do you like to present? Do you not? Do you like to, do you like math, right? Do you like, writing, right? Those aspects, do you like speaking, right? Or doing things in public or presenting? So those kind of things are important in what you pick as a career path. And so I would say, look at all those signals, right? Because they're really, really important, right? And so we look at Flymates and people that are applying to Flywire as how well do they know themselves, right? Because that's almost more important in a lot of ways than the subject matter, right? Like we spend so much time going through college and coming out, with finance or accounting or whatever, but there's so many different areas within those subject matters that you could really pursue a career, right? A career in a Big Four audit company is very different than being in accounting at Flywire, right? Or a finance department for a tech company. So I would say look at those elements that aren't necessarily what do you like to study, and try and understand those. One thing we oftentimes look at is what team-based activities have you been a part of, right? Like, were you either in sports? Did you do extracurricular things that sometimes it's more important. My eye often jumps there even before where did you go to university or what was your GPA? Because again, you're in a team-based environment, and you're in a team-based environment where you're competing, you're trying to figure things out that you don't know how to do yet. And so those kind of skill sets of who the people truly are and how well do they know themselves are often very important.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the students that are listening, I'm gonna ask Mike one more question, and then we're gonna open it up to your questions. So if you're looking at an iPad or an iPhone, hit the question mark and you can submit your questions, and they'll come to me and I can ask Mike. If you're looking at a desktop, there's a question bar over to the side and you can type your questions in. So fire away, and I'll ask them of Mike in a moment. Mike, you started at the beginning, you almost took my thunder, but one of the questions I like to ask at the end is, Dr. Crowley, our principal, talks a great deal about servant leadership, and it's a big aspect of who we are at St. John's. We really try to define it as influencing any situation that we encounter for the benefit of others. Can you talk about how you as a CEO of Flywire, and even in your life outside of being a CEO, try and live that vocation of servant leader, and what are some of the benefits and challenges you see of kind of embracing that model of leadership?
Yeah, happy to. I think this is probably one of the things that surprises me the most, is how people claim it to be so refreshing, right? Which is, again, there's 500 plus Flymates, and I think if you had 10 of them or 50 of them on this webinar, I think the approachability of a leader, I think, is really important, right? It's so easy, no matter what size of your organization, to kind of be put in this position of kind of power and leadership and power kind of be putting together. I love somebody had done a diagram of the pyramid, an organizational pyramid, and the leadership on the top. I've always been a believer, like, the pyramid's upside down, right? The leader's on the bottom, right? And so much of it balances on the leader, right? Like, the people who are touching the customer are at the top, right? And I think that comes into how you make decisions. I think are you making decisions, and do you understand the implications of those decisions to various people, various locations? I just did an all company meeting last week, and the level of transparency we've always had in the company, right? I mean, we've had ups and downs throughout our history as building this company, and there were times 6-7 years ago we didn't know if we were going to make it, right, and get it through the next part of the challenge. And so I've always been a big believer that you have to have a layer of authenticity, and you have to have a way of talking to people that brings them along, right, as opposed to pretending like you know all the answers, right? One of the most common things I'll say is, I just don't know, right? I often joke with people and say, if you ask my wife, I make mistakes every day, so I'm going to make mistakes at work too, right? So I think it's really important to have that level of humbleness as well, and I think that's part of being a servant leader. It's like you can't believe that you're the one that knows all the answers or has all the answers, right? You're again in a support function to everyone else, and again, I think in my personal life, there's probably more work to do there. I love volunteering. I love giving back. I hope more of that is in my schedule over my kind of as I get older in years. Sure. But it's definitely on the forefront of how I operate on a daily basis with the team. I just don't think there's a way to lead any other way.
Sure. No, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, it's a lot of what we really challenge our students to kind of figure out is you don't need a title to be a leader. You don't need to be a CEO or a headmaster. You can kind of embrace this concept of servant leadership and influence things in a positive way, no matter what you're doing in a day-to-day basis. So a couple questions from our students have come in. One is when you look at St. John's, you were a student there 92 to 96. Your sons are at the school right now. How has the school changed, or what do you see that's different about St. John's from the early 90s to the early 2020s?
Yeah, obviously the facilities are unbelievable. I mean, the campus was always amazing, no matter what era you were part of. and just the ability to kind of get around campus and enjoy that campus was I always thought was amazing, no matter what generation you're in. But today, I mean, it's at a whole nother level. So I think the physical change has been amazing. It is unusual. I have two boys that have one gone through middle school and one that's there now. You know, dropping your son off to the place where you went to high school is a weird feeling.
Sure.
And so I would say the environment, the way it's adapted to the middle school, I think has been really neat. You know, I think a lot of there's very few places I think where you can get that level of middle school education and that prep, especially during what is I think a critical time frame for kids, where it's so difficult, I think, socially and figuring out kind of who you are. So you know, that's probably been the part I look at and say it's very consistent with the prep I went to from a values perspective and from what they teach. But you know, it's amazing how to see it applied to another demographic of boys, which I think is great. You know, the alumni community, I think, has just strengthened over time. And I'd like to see more of the, you know, modern career paths. I thought that was probably one of the coolest things that, you know, Kevin and others have been doing, is really getting tech and other things that may have been underrepresented historically at St. John's, right? And getting it more in the forefront, getting more alumni back who have different career paths. I think that's really important.
Good. And so when you look at your history of, and actually the only other thing that's weirder than dropping your sons off at your own high school is dropping them off at your biggest rival high school when you went to Xaverian, and now your sons go to St. John's Prep, and you hear about that on a fairly regular basis. So.
That's probably true.
One of our students wants to know how old were you when you started your first business and kind of got the entrepreneur bug?
Yeah, you know, I got hooked into startups, but they weren't my own. You know, I frankly thought I would start one fully earlier, but you know, you have like I never ended up with an MBA either. I almost left the first startup I was a part of, to go back for an MBA because I wanted to start something, and I felt like I needed the MBA to do it. And I was fortunate. I had people who, you know, I remember I had a chief operating officer who I sat down with who said, like, you're in the middle of your best potential MBA ever, right? Like I was at a tech company, you know, at tech companies, especially in your early 20s, you know, I say it's like dog years in reverse, right? Like the experience you're given happens way faster than what would happen in corporate America. And mostly you get opportunities you just should have never have gotten, right? Sure. Irrespective of experience or age. And so, so for me, I was very fortunate that I actually got to see two startups kind of progress through that life cycle. And it wasn't until I had a leadership position here at Flywire. So it was a bit later in my career, early 30s, before really kind of helping build something from the ground up.
So a couple of our viewers right now are part of the entrepreneur education program, and they're asking, you know, as their current high school students, what advice would you give them to think about their future as they look at their classes in college and work? If they want to be successful entrepreneurs, what are some of the things they should be mindful of as they move forward?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I see is like, make sure you like look at the curriculum. Like I know you guys do something with BAPS, and I went to BAPS, and that's where I transferred into. And you know, I love the fact that they gave all the students actual dollars to go and build a business and then donate to charity at the end of the semester if you made profit. And like that was built into their curriculum. So there are places to go if that's what you love. There are places to go and to focus on that. So I would definitely say know those, understand those, because I think they're an important part of it. I'd also say when you look at starting something, think through the skill set, right? So like the founding team skill set is really important. So you may have an idea, but you may lack the skill set to, you know, get the idea moving forward. And so how do you augment yourself with a founding team that allows that? You know, I do a lot of work with venture capital folks in Boston, and I see a lot of companies trying to get funding. And it's one thing to have the idea, but when people look to invest, they're looking to invest in a team they think they can get the idea move forward. And if getting the money is what you need to then move the idea forward, you have to likely figure out a way to move the idea forward with what you have, right? And that may be an engineer that's working part-time for stock, or that may be your buddy who you went to college with who's a great engineer. Like, how do you build that team around the idea? or how do you yourself get the skill set you need to actually get the idea moving? Because oftentimes people who are looking to give you money, they want to see how you progress facing adversity versus just writing you $1 million check to get going. And so I would say if you're thinking about no matter what type of business you're in, right, how can you develop those hands-on skills to move the idea forward no matter what kind of you face?
Somebody who was listening early on said, you said something about when you're CEO, one of the agile skills you need to have is to make decisions when you don't have all the information. How do you surround yourself with good people? How do you listen to advice that's contradictory to what maybe you think should happen? And can you talk a little bit about how you select somebody to be an advisor for you in the role of CEO as you're leading Flywire forward?
Yeah, I think values are really, really important, right? And again, at Flywire, we faced adversity early on. And so I often say we unearthed our values, right? We didn't actually a lot of tech companies start and they put these big fancy posters up and, these aspirational values. We kind of missed that part because we were trying to make the business survive. And when we came out the other end, I always said my job was to unearth with words what the values were, because I saw them every day. We just had never written them down and described them before. And so I think that's a really important piece. If you don't have a clear set of values, then you have a hard time measuring for bringing in and recruiting anyone, including the leadership team, right? Like if the leadership team or subject matter experts or your best performer, if they don't follow the values that you hold important, you're kind of rudderless. You're kind of without a compass, right? And so once you have that, then I think you have a level of alignment where if the values are set right and you know that the people are believers in those values, I think you can have a healthy debate of ideas. But when you don't have those, when you have politics, when you have drama, when you have behaviors that are against your values and you don't address them, I think it gets really challenging. So I think if you base it off of a strong set of values, those are the people you bring in and you seek advice from. I think then you can have a very healthy debate of how to progress, and I think the better ideas usually come out of a combination of mindsets getting together.
Great. Just to close things out, Mike, as we kind of come up on the end of the half hour, our alumni office is doing a mentoring challenge. We're getting a lot of information out there to kind of our alums to look at different ways to mentor people in their fields and mentor current prep students. Did you have a mentor? Do you have a mentor today that kind of helps you as you move forward? And did you have one when you were a student at St. John's? And how important is it to find a mentor if you're looking to get into something like the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I mean, I have both my father and my brother, both in business. So from a business perspective, always had kind of great people to look up to at different parts, even to this day, right? Running a company and being able to pick up the phone and talk to your dad or your brother about some of the challenges is super, super useful. I also have a great chairman of my board who, again, so I think it is critical that you have people that you can turn to, and you build up that network, right? And so I've always been fortunate to have that. And I would say if you don't have that at home, use the prep community, use your network, right? Use, again, the subject matters you like, oftentimes I think can lead to finding that right, mentor or network.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate your willingness to share a little bit of your day with us and to share some good insights with our community. I hope you and your family continue to stay healthy and well, and look forward to seeing the great things that Flywire is going to continue to do. And congratulations on all you've achieved to date.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you guys having me. And
thanks,
stay healthy.
You too. Thanks. Take care. Have a great rest of the day.